We're all taught to see suffering as some kind of personal failure. But what if that's just completely wrong? What if all that struggle is actually a sign that a system is working exactly the way it's supposed to? Let's dig into that. Right? When things get tough, it's almost a reflex to turn that blame inward. We immediately think, I must have messed up, or there's something fundamentally broken about me. This quote just nails that heavy personal feeling of failure that we so often attach to our pain. All right, so first up, let's really unpack this idea, the judgment of suffering. We're going to explore why we're so incredibly quick to see our pain as a personal flaw instead of, just a part of being human. As soon as we decide that suffering is a moral issue, our brains just kick into overdrive trying to find the culprit. And let's be honest, who's the easiest person to blame? Ourselves. And that's when we start spiraling down this rabbit hole of really painful, disempowering questions. What did I do wrong? Why is this happening to me? Why am I being punished? See, these aren't just questions. They're like little self-inflicted wounds. They just reinforce this toxic belief that our pain is some kind of final verdict on our worth. And that's a cage we build for ourselves. But hold on a second. What if we've been asking the wrong questions this whole time? What if this entire framework of blame and punishment is just built on a totally faulty premise? Let's just consider a radical alternative. What if your suffering has absolutely nothing to do with you personally? And this is where we get to the real heart of it. We're going to make a huge shift in perspective, moving from the moral to the mechanical. We're going to start looking at suffering not as a punishment, but as a simple, totally neutral force of nature. This slide lays out the shift perfectly. We're moving away from that old, heavy view of pain as something personal, moral, and judgmental, and we're embracing a new perspective, that pain can be seen as mechanical, neutral, and honestly just a source of information. It's not about denying the pain, not at all. It's about totally redefining what it means. So what are we talking about instead? We're talking about friction. And here's the key definition. It's super simple. Friction is just the impersonal resistance that shows up when movement meets a boundary. That's it. No intent, no malice, no judgment. It's basically just physics. Just think about it in these terms for a second. A machine doesn't grind to a halt because it's somehow immoral. A body doesn't get inflamed because it's wrong. A bone breaks when the force is greater than its flexibility. And a mind gets overwhelmed when the pressure exceeds its capacity. In every single one of these cases, it's a neutral, mechanical response. It is not a moral failing. So, here's the bottom line. Reality is not your judge. It doesn't hand out punishments. It just responds, neutrally, predictably, to all the forces at play. Okay, so if suffering is just this mechanical friction, then why does it have to exist at all? I mean, why can't we just have a smooth, frictionless life? Well, as it turns out, resistance isn't just inevitable, it's absolutely essential. In any living system, and I mean from a single cell all the way up to an entire society, there's this unbreakable chain of cause and effect. Freedom allows for variability. That variability creates tension, and tension will always inevitably produce friction. It's a fundamental law of life and growth. Think about it. If there's no friction, no resistance, then there's no signal that anything needs to change, right? The system just becomes rigid, and it's completely unable to adapt to new conditions. It's kind of like building muscle. If you don't have any resistance, you don't get any growth. And the exact same thing is true for any living system, whether that's you, a company, or a whole society. We actually need challenges to push us beyond our limits and force us to evolve. And here's the really surprising truth. A system that never makes mistakes can never learn. Errors aren't failures. They're just data points. They're the feedback that allows us to correct our course and get smarter. In other words, imperfection is actually the price of intelligence. Which brings us to this profound and honestly pretty counterintuitive conclusion. Perfect systems are dead systems. A life without any friction is a life without growth, without adaptation, without learning. The very things that make us feel alive are fueled by the resistance we face. This changes the whole game, doesn't it? Pain is no longer the enemy that we have to conquer. It's a messenger. It's a vital form of feedback from the system. It's telling us where the pressure is, where our boundaries are, and where we need to adapt and change. Now, this all sounds great in theory, but how do we actually use this in our lives? Well, it all comes down to the power of asking a totally different kind of question. The next time you find yourself right in the middle of a struggle, I want you to just pause and ask yourself this. What if this pain isn't a judgment on who I am? What if it's just information, a message that's trying to get through to me? So much of our suffering doesn't come from the friction itself. It comes from our desperate belief that it shouldn't be there in the first place. We're fighting a battle against the very nature of life, and that's a battle we can never, ever win. So here it is, the quiet little shift that can change everything. We stop asking the victim's question, why me? And we start asking the creator's question, what is this showing me? One question is looking for blame, the other is looking for wisdom. So we'll leave you with this thought. The answer isn't to deny your friction or try to numb yourself to it. The answer is to get curious, to lean in, to understand its mechanics, and to actually listen to the message it's trying to send you. So I'll ask you, what is your friction trying to show you right now?